Chapter 19, Part 1 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 19. If at first you don't succeed, Part 1. Now that we were all thoroughly launched on this somewhat chaotic adventure, I envied Anthony because his part in the drama kept him in the wings, within sight of the stage. He was to watch the house of Rashid Bey, and if the rescue party of two did not appear after an hour's absence, the true story of the affair and Mabel's appeal was to be laid before the Inspector General of Upper Egypt, laid before him not by Ahmed Antoun Effendi, but by Captain Anthony Fenton, officially on leave, secretly on a special mission for the British government. My role, less exciting but perhaps no less important, was to play the diplomat in beguiling the American consul to stand by the wife of Rashid Bey, if the attempt at rescue succeeded, or, if possible, even if it failed. Antoun accounted for his presence in front of Rashid Bey's high garden wall by attracting a crowd, and lecturing them in his character of Hadji, while I dashed off in a jingling arabeah to the American consulate. As in Cairo, my progress was one long adjuration of the crowd by the driver, who would have revelled in conducting the car of a juggernaut. "Shamalak, ya waled! To the left, O boy!" or "Yemanik! To the right!" he roared, while men dived and dipped under his horse's prancing feet. A hawk flew by on my right side, and my right eyelid twitched as we neared the consulate. In Egypt these were good omens. Besides, there had been a red sunrise, which in the Nile country had meant, since Egyptians superseded the prehistoric new race, that Ra had conquered his enemies, and stained the sky with their blood. Therefore all should be well with me and the world, and it did seem as if my hopes bade fair to be fulfilled, when in the consul I recognized a man I had been able to advise in a small official difficulty in my early days at the embassy in Rome. This was even more fortunate than the case of Slaney. We shook hands warmly, and as soon as was decent I interrupted a flow of reminiscent gratitude by flooding Mr. James Bronson with the story of Rashid Bey's unhappy American bride, Mabella Hânem, ill-treated as well as cruelly deceived, if her story were true. He knew Rashid slightly, but the marriage was news to him. With an interest he listened to my account of the lonely little governess in Paris, bewitched by the love-making of a handsome Turk as white as herself. But when I asked for help, the consul shook his head. "Lord Ernest," he said, "there's nothing I'd like better than to pay my debt by doing you some favour. But you're asking me the one thing that's hardest, as you probably know. You understand as well as I do that when a girl marries a man, she ceases to be a subject of her native land, and to interfere with the inmate of a harem is just about impossible. But I'll tell you what I will do for your sake. If you can get the girl out of Rashid Bey's house, which, mind you, I doubt, you may bring her to my wife, and we'll cook up some story about her being a relative of mine. So she is, I guess, through Adam and Eve. If you think she's been badly treated, we'll stand by her, once she's under this roof, which means she'll be on American soil, through thick and thin, whatever the consequences. I can't go farther, and I don't believe that you expected I would." I admitted that I had not, and thanked him for his promise. By this time I thought that Brigit and Monny might be on their way to meet me at the consulate as arranged, escorted by Antoun, and perhaps bringing Mabel. Even the route they were to take was planned, so that I could not miss them if I started. Meanwhile Mr. Bronson was to interest his wife in our protégé. Back I flew, my ears deafened by more "Ya Weleds," but, though I met many things and many creatures on the congested road, there was no arabeah containing the desired ones. I made my driver slacken pace as we neared the big, square pink house of Rashid Bey, set far back in its garden of palms and impossible statues, on the bank of the Nile. No green turban was in sight, and I wondered what could have happened as we drove slowly past the ponderous black gatekeeper, apparently half asleep on his bench. There was nothing to do but crawl along at a snail's pace, lest that droop of crocodile lids should be assumed for effect. I went on, meaning to turn presently, but when the arabeah had taken me beyond eyeshot of Rashid's gatekeeper, an Arab Saka or water seller ran forward, striking his musical gong. From his brass jar, protected by crimson-dyed horsehair to keep out dust, He offered a draught, and his looks said that he had something more for me than a drink of water. I beckoned him close, stopping the arabeah, and under the tumbler he handed up was a folded bit of paper. None save the water seller had attention to spare for me just then, as a wedding procession was approaching, with a crude but gorgeous curtained litter drawn by camels, and a number of musicians with raitas, darbukas, the key and bottle, and other Eastern instruments which may have been the ancestors of the Highlanders' bagpipes. The street crowd followed, enchanted by the plaintive, monotonous tones, grotesque to newcomers from the West, but enthralling to those who have fallen under the spell of their melancholy magic. Failure for the present, but Miss G. and Mrs. J. safe, Anthony had scrawled in pencil. Couldn't wait in front of R.'s house, but you'll find us at an Arab restaurant to which the messenger will guide you. All you have to do is to discharge your arabeah and walk in the direction the man takes, keeping your distance in case you're watched. I obeyed instructions, and in the town of Asiut, far from the gardens along the Nile front, I came to a house between the mosque of the tallest minaret, and the great market whither Arabia as well as Egypt sends her wares. It was a house of some pretension, though in a narrow unpaved street, lined with humble native dwellings. I guessed that it must have been built for a rich man who had died or failed in business, but now a sign in Arabic announced that it was a restaurant. A nod from the water seller told that I had reached the end of the journey. Nubian servants salaamed in the big room where once the master of the house had held receptions, and in a smaller room beyond I saw Antoun, Brigit, and Monny. They were seated at a low table where no forks or knives or even plates were laid. In the centre of the white cloth stood a large dish of something sweet and rich-looking, from which everybody pretended to eat, but at sight of me Brigit and Monny began talking together. They told me breathlessly how they had been informed by the gatekeeper that Mabella Hânem was not well. Having insisted that they were intimate friends whom she would desire to see, they had been bidden to return in an hour. Reluctantly coming away, they had as soon as was prudent been joined by Antoun. He had taken them to the bazaars, hoping to give them a glimpse of the shops before the Set returned from the tombs, but they had met Neil Sheridan, who had something to tell. He had caught sight of Bedr running after the carriage of a Turk strongly resembling Rashid Bey. The carriage had stopped near the railway station, and after an instant's conversation the horses had been turned to gallop off in the direction whence they had come. "Of course we were sure the Turk was Rashid," said Monny, "so Anton Effendi thought we'd better go back to watch his house. When we got there it was too late, for already some time had passed since Mr. Sheridan saw Bedr. Rashid's gateman said that Mabella Hânem was suddenly better, and had gone away with her husband. He could talk a little French, so we understood perfectly, and anyhow you know I'm studying Arabic. It's so discouraging when Arabs answer me in Cockney English, or say 'sure' in American. We believed the fellow, because it seemed exactly what Wretched would do, come back and grab Mabel away at a moment's notice. So unfortunate about Neil Sheridan. Wretched was idiotically jealous of him on the Laconia, and if he caught a glimpse of him today he's certain to think Mr. Sheridan's here to try and see Mabel. We tore to the railroad depot, but the train was just going out. No doubt Rashid and his wife were both on it. Isn't it heartbreaking?" I sat mute, thinking things over, but Anthony tried to give consolation by saying that he still had some hope. He had found out that Rashid Bey owned a sugar plantation, with a house on it, near Luxor. The train which had left Asiut was bound for Luxor. In a very few days our boat would land us there, and we would try our luck again. "Not much doubt," Fenton added, speaking as always in French, "that this is Bedr's revenge on us. He must have told Rashid that Miss Gilder had mentioned his name, saying she hoped he was leaving home. That hint of danger would be enough for any Turk." "It will be my fault then," moaned Monny, "if he kills Mabel. He's deceived and shut her up and tried to convert her. Worse than all, he has another wife. The next step will be murder. Oh, how can we bear the delay of going on to Luxor by boat? Hadn't we better take a train? Better miss all the things we've come to Egypt to see, rather than leave Mabel to her fate." "Rashid isn't the sort to have her put out of the way," said Anthony. "He's not a bad fellow, as such men go, and he's hardly had time to tire of his conquest yet. According to his lights, he's right not to allow any interference with his harem from Europeans. He was jealous on board ship of one or two men of your acquaintance, you've told me. This attempted visit of yours will revive his interest in his wife, inconveniently for us, but if I know his type it will die down again.